The 2000s might be the most slept on decade for horror, but today I'm going to bat for this underappreciated era with my hand-picked best horror movie from each year of the 2000s. Welcome to the Cinema Cult. I'm CT. It's April, which means we're halfway to Halloween, and I've been thinking about the horror movies I love to rewatch and decided to look back at the 2000s and let my tastes, or lack thereof, guide me through this underrated decade to come up with my personal top 10 of the 2000s, choosing my favorite movie from each year. So, starting off in the most obvious place with the year 2000, there's a lot to love from that year. You got the coming-of-age werewolf story Ginger Snaps, sci-fi horror like The Cell and Hollow Man, and a stone-cold classic in American Psycho, but my favorite from 2000 has always been Final Destination. Final Destination is director James Wong's feature debut, hit theaters March of 2000, and it's a movie I instantly fell in love with. I'd even put this franchise starter amongst my favorite horror movies of all time. I just really dig this premise. And this really is basically a cosmic horror meets supernatural slasher movie where the killer is death itself, stalking down a group of teenagers one by one. The twist, of course, is Alex's vision of Flight 180 exploding mid-air and then causing a kerfuffle that gets this group kicked off the flight before it really does explode moments after takeoff. But this group haven't been saved, they've only delayed the inevitable, and death is set to collect their souls in some very gnarly ways. And nowadays, anyone who's even casually into horror will be familiar with the Final Destination franchise, and I think this first Final Destination movie remains just as effective today as it did back in 2000. Some of these deaths are slow and agonizing, like Todd slipping in the bathroom, but then they're the ones that seem to come out of nowhere.
And you can just drop fucking dead.
My top scene is teacher Val Luton's ordeal at home that starts with an exploding computer monitor, continues with a terribly placed dish rag, and finishes with the entire house exploding. It's one of the franchise's most harrowing sequences that really sets the tone for every Final Destination movie going forward. Now, if somehow you still haven't seen Final Destination, this is absolutely a must-see for any horror fan. And moving on to 2001, there are some interesting possibilities. There's The Others, or 13 Ghosts if you're into different kinds of twisty haunted house films, or Ichi the Killer for fans of ultra-violence. I even have nice things to say about John Carpenter's underappreciated Ghost of Mars, but when it comes to 2001, I can't deny my love for Jason X. And it's time I just admitted that it's my favorite horror movie from that year. Listen, I know Jason X is a controversial pick, but hear me out. As much as I love horror movies, I'm not always looking for something seriously scary, and sometimes I just want a movie that's dumb, fun, and entertaining, and when it comes to dumb, fun, and entertaining, it's tough to do much better than Jason X.
Guys, it's okay, he just wanted his machete back!
Everything about this movie is ridiculous, and I appreciate that Jason X is happy to fully lean into that. I'm also a sucker for sci-fi of questionable quality, so Jason in Space is always going to resonate with me, because by the time this one came out, Leprechaun and Hellraiser, they'd already been to space, and we all knew that if a horror franchise was going to space, that means it's a full commitment to getting as weird as possible with a classic character. Jason X is set in the future where a cryogenically frozen Jason is discovered by some students visiting whatever's left of Earth, and they stupidly take him aboard their ship where he thaws out, and even worse, he uses their future technology to give himself a few upgrades, introducing the universe to the likes of Uber Jason. And Jason X also has one of my favorite kills from the whole Friday the 13th franchise when Jason freezes a girl's face in a vat of liquid nitrogen and smashes it off a countertop. It perfectly encapsulates what this 10th entry of this franchise is all about. Moving on to 2002, if you catch me on the right day, I might unironically choose Resident Evil as my second favorite movie from that year. I genuinely love that flick. You've also got some impressive feature debuts with Eli Roth's Cabin Fever and Neil Marshall's Dog Soldiers, but really, there's only one horror movie that deserves to be called the best horror movie of 2002, and it's 28 Days Later. 28 Days Later is an instant horror classic that reinvigorated an entire subgenre when it was released. Back in 2002, zombie movies were, ironically, pretty much dead. But then director Danny Boyle came along with this movie filmed on consumer-grade digital cameras about a rage virus that creates some extremely vicious infected taking over the UK, and suddenly zombies were cool again. It's hard to overstate how much 28 Days Later changed the idea of what a zombie movie could be. And yes, I know they're not technically undead zombies, but let's be honest, if a creature is basically mindless and instinctually chasing me down to munch on my flesh, to me, that's a zombie. And I don't care if the cause of zombieism is viral, supernatural, or otherwise. Now, of course, these new style-infected zombies are far more vicious than a traditional Romero-style zombie, sprinting full speed after their victims with blood-red eyes filled with pure animalistic rage. 28 Days Later is one of those movies that has an incredible ability to quickly shift tone from one moment to the next. Cillian Murphy's character, Jim, has barely awoken from his 28-day coma. He finds himself seemingly all alone in an empty city of London. Then he stumbles upon a church full of infected, and suddenly he's running for his life and getting bailed out by some fellow survivors. And that's just the beginning of Jim's quest to survive, which takes an extremely dark turn in the third act that proves other humans are still the biggest threat around. Moving on to 2003, you've got some highly regarded foreign choices such as High Tension out of France and One Missed Call from Japan. It was also the year that Freddy and Jason finally faced off. But this year was owned by the rural killer subgenre with House of a Thousand Corpses, Wrong Turn, and my favorite movie of the year, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. Now, before I get into this remake, I have to put it out there that Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre is an absolutely untouchable piece of horror cinema. I'm not under any delusions that this 2003 remake is on that level. But that out of the way, I've always been partial to this iteration of Texas Chainsaw, and I remember having a hell of a good time watching this one in theaters back in the day. Now, in this version of the story, we got a group of friends traveling through Texas on their way to a concert when they run into an extremely frightened hitchhiker who quickly decides she can't take it anymore and makes a mess of their van. Now, in search of help, these youths instead run into the extended members of the Hewitt family, a rural clan of violent Texans, and they eventually end up on the wrong end of a chainsaw brandished by the infamous Leatherface, a hulking killer who wears human faces as masks. Now, I appreciated that this was a back-to-basics remake that stuck to the concept of the original story, along with some absolutely brutal moments. Arlie Ermey has a standout performance as the evil sheriff, plus this film contains one of my favorite shots in a horror movie. And I'll never forget the way I felt the first time I watched the camera pull back through the van, revealing the group's reactions after the hitchhiker does that thing we can't talk about. Moving on to 2004, there were a lot of late entries into existing franchises like Seed of Chucky, Alien vs. Predator, and Blade Trinity. It also saw the beginning of the Saw franchise. Not to mention two zombie movies I really enjoy, Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, and my favorite movie of 2004, Shaun of the Dead. Shaun of the Dead was Edgar Wright's feature directorial debut, and I have no problem calling this movie one of the greatest horror comedies ever made. When this movie came out in 2004, I wasn't familiar with Edgar Wright or the stars of this movie, Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, but that team had already been cutting their teeth on a British sitcom named Space, which is also really worth checking out. Now, as for Shaun of the Dead, it's the rare horror comedy that knows how to toe the line perfectly between those two genres. It never gets too comedic for the danger to not feel real, and it's always ready with a joke to lighten some truly heartbreaking moments as Shaun tries to lead his friends and family to the safety of their favorite pub during a zombie apocalypse, all while convincing his ex-girlfriend that he's ready to be a real adult. Shaun of the Dead also qualifies as one of my most memorable theatrical experiences ever. I was working at the mall at the time when someone came around handing out free passes to a screening of a British zombie rom-com movie, as he described it, and honestly, I thought it sounded kind of dumb, but I had nothing better to do. I'm so thankful I went in because I always felt a little spoiled by getting to see this movie before most people had the chance and knowing that I had seen something truly special at the time. Moving on to 2005, it was an absolutely stacked year for horror, especially if you like the more gruesome stuff such as Hostel, The Devil's Rejects, Wolf Creek, and Saw 2. George Romero also returned to make his last good zombie movie, Land of the Dead, and I've always thought House of Wax could contend for the best remake of the 2000s era. But once again, it's a British film that wins out as my favorite for the year with The Descent. Neil Marshall came out swinging with his feature debut Dog Soldiers in 2002, but he really kicked it up a notch in 2005 with The Descent. But I should clarify before we get into it, this movie does have two different endings and it makes a huge difference. The UK version, known as the unrated version in the US, that's absolutely the one you want to go with if you've never seen this one before. Just trust me on that one. One of the amazing things about The Descent is this is a creature feature film where the creatures are far from the scariest thing in the movie. This one centers around 6 women headed into the Appalachian Mountains to do some caving, and they've barely even entered this cave system, and my hands are already getting sweaty. I do not love tight spaces, and you would never catch me voluntarily crawling through some of these cave passages that are barely wide enough to navigate. Then things start going really wrong for this group as the earth shifts and the cave collapses behind them. The situation goes from bad to worse when it's revealed this is not the well-mapped cave system they thought they were in, and there might not even be a way back out. Now that's before it's discovered that this cave system also houses a clan of blind, carnivorous creatures who begin hunting the group in the dark and picking them off. This movie plays on lots of fears, claustrophobia, the betrayal of trusted friends, and of course those creatures in the dark, making it a must-see in my opinion. Moving on to 2006, and outside of a brutal The Hills Have Eyes remake, horror gets more fun with self-aware slashers like Behind the Mask and Hatchet, and also my favorite movie of the year, Slither. Nowadays, James Gunn is busy running the DC universe and directing Superman movies, but he got his start in the industry writing for Troma in the 90s before releasing his feature debut Slither 20 years later. And Slither is basically a love letter to all the 80s movies that were themselves love letters to monster movies from the 50s, which is why I love it so much. It's a film that's filled to the brim with crazy creature effects and genuinely funny characters with a story that feels both fresh and familiar at the same time. It's a difficult tightrope to walk, but this movie does it really well. And this setup involves Michael Rooker's Grant character investigating a nearby meteorite and getting infected with a slug-like alien organism that's looking to bring all life on Earth under the control of its hive mind. Grant's transformation begins almost immediately. Before you know it, he's got tentacles growing out of his chest to spread this hive mind infection, and I think his first victim, Brenda, definitely got it the worst since she quickly swells to the size of a barn before eventually exploding and releasing a horde of mind-controlling slugs onto the town. It's the kind of scene that'll make half an audience laugh with glee while the other half tries to choke back their vomit, and well, that's just the beginning of where this movie's willing to go. Slither really feels like James Gunn's homage to the movies he grew up with, and fans of 80s sci-fi horror will definitely dig this one. Moving on to 2007, and it was a strong year for the horror genre. Grindhouse fans got the double feature of Planet Terror and Death Proof, holiday anthology movie fans got Trick or Treat, vampire fans got 30 Days of Night, and the Nihilists got that ending from The Mist. It was also a big year for found footage with Paranormal Activity, and my favorite of the year, a movie out of Spain called Wreck. I've said it before and I'll say it again, Wreck is absolutely one of my favorite found footage movies of all time. And even if you're not generally into found footage, I would absolutely recommend you give this one a chance because it really is an incredibly well-crafted horror film that takes full advantage of its settings and the found footage angle. It even makes sense that the camera would keep rolling since this movie revolves around a local news reporter and her cameraman following a group of firemen on what they thought was a routine call. But when they arrive inside this apartment building, one of the first responders is attacked, and it turns out this is ground zero of a zombie outbreak, And this nightmare has only just begun, because this building has also been quarantined by the authorities who are going to shoot anyone attempting to leave. I really appreciate that Wreck is a lean, mean movie that doesn't waste any time. These survivors, composed of the news crew, some first responders, and some residents, are in a real pressure cooker situation where they're literally stuck between the barrel of a gun and a zombie infection that's quickly spreading throughout this entire apartment building. And as that group gets whittled down, there become fewer places to hide, and it all leads up to the penthouse where they run into the source of this infection. And it's a truly frightening sight, made even creepier since we can only see this creature through the camera's night vision. Moving on to 2008, and it was an incredibly strong year for foreign horror with films like Martyrs, Let the Right One In, Lake Mungo, Tokyo Gore Police, and Eden Lake. Cloverfield and The Strangers are two of the most endearing movies of that year, but my favorite is a low-budget overachiever called Splinter. Yeah, 2008 was a pretty stacked year, but Splinter is the kind of small-scale horror done well that I absolutely love. This creature feature, body horror, siege film kicks off with a young couple on a camping trip getting carjacked by a convict and his girlfriend, and after hitting something strange in the road, they end up stranded in a remote gas station where they're attacked by the possessed remains of a station worker. It turns out that thing they hit is a spiky parasitic organism spreading through this area, looking to infect and control organic matter, and it doesn't care whether that flesh is dead or alive. Now personally, I'd rather be deceased than get taken out by this stuff, because once it gets its spikes into its victims and starts spreading, it's gonna do whatever it wants with your body, and if that means snapping a few bones in the process, well, so be it. Now, I think what elevates this low-budget creature feature beyond some genuinely cool effects are the characters. I particularly enjoyed Shea Whigham's performance as the convict Dennis. He has a great arc as this one plays out. He's the sort of character actor that's always solid, whether he's popping up in an Oscar contender or something low-budget like this. Now, he also has an amputation scene in this movie that's absolutely brutal. Splinter is probably the most underseen movie on this list of my favorites from the 2000s, so make sure you track this one down if you haven't seen it yet, because it's definitely worth your time. Moving on, 2009 wasn't dominated by any one genre of horror, featuring a little bit of everything, from terrifying tales like Triangle and House of the Devil, to horror comedies like Zombieland, Drag Me to Hell, and Jennifer's Body. But I've got to go with a movie that I don't think would be most folks' choice for Best of 2009, but I said before, I'm a sucker for sci-fi horror and space, so let's get into Pandorum. This might not be the most popular choice. Pandorum was largely dismissed on release, but give this one a rewatch. I think you'll be surprised at how tense and engaging this movie is. Now, coming from German director Christian Albert with Paul W.S. Anderson producing, this movie's got deep space survival, psychological horror, and some gnarly creature designs all wrapped up in a mystery that doesn't fully reveal itself until the final shocking moments of this film. Pandorum begins with a member of the flight crew, Corporal Bauer, played by Ben Foster, waking up from hypersleep aboard this massive spaceship, and it's immediately clear that something's very wrong here. He's got no memory of his mission or how long he's been out, plus the ship's power is surging and becoming increasingly unstable. The only other person around is Dennis Quaid's equally confused character Peyton, who also just woke up from hypersleep. Bauer's on a mission to fix the ship's reactor, but the further he ventures into this ship, the more he realizes things are far worse than he or Peyton could have ever imagined. Pandorum kicks off as a claustrophobic space horror flick, but it evolves into an action-packed adventure full of mystery and some extremely dangerous mutated humanoid creatures hunting down Bauer and his fellow survivors in search of their next meal. I just love how the mystery of Pandorum unfolds as this movie plays out, and you may find yourself very surprised as it explores what happened to that original crew and where all these lethal creatures came from. So there you have it, my favorite horror movie from each year of the 2000s. And I gotta be honest, I kind of surprised myself with some of these selections. If this was a straight up top 10 of the 2000s, there definitely would have been some changes, but I'm sure some of you all have strong feelings on your choice of the best movie for each year. So if I neglected to mention your favorite horror film from the 2000s, make sure you drop it in the comments below, because I'm pretty curious to see how other people view this extremely underrated decade of horror. Now, I enjoyed this yearly best of concept so much, next time I'm taking it back to the 90s. So if you enjoyed this trip through the 2000s, make sure you hit those like and subscribe buttons so you don't miss the next one. In the meantime, you can get into some of my other horror movie lists right here. But that's it for today. I'm CT Reese. Thanks for hanging out with me and keep watching weird movies. I know I will.